The Zarlum Chronicles, Episode 1. The Fall of Zarlum, Part 1.
Humans. Humans really, truly are fascinating and amazing creatures. No one can deny humans have unquestionable amounts of intelligence and are at the very top of the intelligence chain on their planet, far outpacing any other form of life. Because of that, they rule over everything on their tiny world. The human race have used their intelligence to become the top of their food chain, which gave them the impressive ability to alter the food chain to suit their needs as they please, mass-producing animals and farms, and even wiping out entire species when they become a minor inconvenience to their lives. No creature could ever even come close to doing something like that. Well, no other species on their planet, that is.
Humans only use 10% of their brain capacity, which may not seem like a lot. However, when you think of all the things the human race has accomplished using it, then it is extremely impressive. They have changed the world in so many ways, sometimes for bad, but every now and again, they do something good for their dying world. Humans have used their intelligence to occupy every country in the world. Their population has increased so much, they've had to build objective groups of people, such as religious groups, and even political groups to bring people together into mass groups of thought and belief. They've built some incredible things, such as an entire computer that fits into a pocket, giving every human the power to have all knowledge and history right at their fingertips, and machines that can lift them up into the stars to touch the heavens themselves. However, the human race would have to be pretty stupid to truly believe they were the only ones out there capable of such intelligence. They only use 10% of their brain capacity. However, what if there was a creature that used 5% more? What could this creature do? What would they be capable of achieving? In this series of stories, you are going to find out what is possible with intelligence. This is also a cautionary tale to be careful with what intelligence can bring out in people, because humans haven't understood yet that intelligence is a responsibility that needs to be taken seriously if they wish to survive. Humans live on a funny little blue and green planet called Earth, which literally means dirt. So it's not really anything very special. Yeah, it has water, air, and an atmosphere, but so do other places. That's not the most original thing in the universe. In fact, Earth is actually a little boring compared to the rest of the chaos that makes up our universe. It is just a piece of dust floating around a ball of fire. Some humans believe that aliens couldn't exist because they would have shown themselves by now. However, they haven't even considered the fact that aliens do exist. But they hadn't created incredibly complicated and sophisticated spaceships capable of achieving light speed to go to a planet which actually means dirt. Furthermore, humans just aren't as interesting as they think they are. They are not the most important creatures of the universe, and it's dangerous for them to believe such a delusion. There are 2 trillion galaxies in our universe, which means there is an unimaginable amount of planets. So, of course, there are other planets with aliens. Humans just haven't discovered them, and they better hope they don't discover them. Humans have sent out satellites and radar signals, and soon the human race will be noticed. They better hope when aliens discover them, they want peace. If not, the human race wouldn't stand a chance. It'll be like Columbus and the Indians. Except humans are the Indians. The Earth is found in the Milky Way galaxy, and the only reason I am bringing up the Earth is that there is another planet out there similar to Earth, apart from it being better in every way. This is the only time that I will ever bring up the human race or the planet of Earth, because these stories are about a species known as the Zerm race. They are also just better in every way that matters.
The planet in question we're going to be looking at was called Zarlum, and it was located in the Spiderweb star system. The system is located millions of light years away from Earth, In fact, the planets and galaxies were so far away from each other, they couldn't actually see each other because their telescopes wouldn't go that far. The spiderweb star system was stunning to look at from the outside and inside because the entire star system looked like it was inside a massive, multicolored gas cloud. When a person looked up from the planets at day, it just looked like a normal blue sky. However, when a person looked up in the middle of the night, it looked like the northern lights around the entire sky, with hundreds of stars twinkling like the whole sky was a beautiful rainbow. However, it only usually happened between 12 and 1. The rest of the time, it's a black sky with the hundreds of stars and occasional glimpse of green or purple lines.
There are many similarities between Earth and Zarlum, and of course, there were differences, both of which we will be going through today. The planet of Zarlum was a lot bigger than Earth. Despite that, they both had the exact same gravity. Around Earth was just one moon called the Moon. See, I told you, the most boring and uninteresting planet in all the universe. Even Saturn has Titan, come on. Earth, just do better. And name your moon better. Zarlum has 4 moons watching down at the planet below, all called Mars, Titan, Pandit, and Wolfskin, all of which were roughly the same size as the moon of Earth, if not a little bigger, and orbiting the planet from different distances and speeds. Because the planet had 4 moons, they had more solar eclipses. Because of the planet's size, the light pollution was basically non-existent, so the nights on Zarlum were stunning to look at. One of the moons had the potential to be inhabited by the people of Zarlum, being Mars, full of trees and rivers just like Earth itself. The planet used to have 6 moons. However, 2 of them broke apart and caused one of the biggest differences between Earth and Zarlum. They formed into 2 giant rings of rocks, orbiting from a large distance, perfectly paralleled against each other in 2 perfect lines, constantly spinning. From the planet below, they didn't look like they were made of rocks. They looked like they were 2 large purple lines and could only be seen at night. Scientists had tried to figure out why the rings were there at all, why they didn't fall apart. However, they were forced to admit that they had no idea. It was just one of Zarlum's many mysteries. Most of the mysteries of Zarlum were actually caused by one of the moons. However, we'll get to the reason why eventually. The year was 2065. However, they don't actually call it the year 2065. They called it Year 0. Because since the world ended, there was no point in keeping calendars. It wasn't like people had plans. The world had really changed from what it once was. The past was a better time. The people were in abundance. The world having a population of just over 36 billion people spread all over the world, which was a lot bigger than Earth. They were all working and living their lives, having no idea of the incomprehensible horrors just waiting to break their world apart, like cracking an egg. They had massive cities, and that was just on the ground. Up above were massive sky cities, able to see everything on the planet below and the skies above. They had special spaceships which could take them up above the clouds and into the stars themselves. They hoped to one day become interplanetary superstars. They hoped to build an empire in space. If their ancestors could see all of what they had done and what they had become, they would view them as pure and perfect gods. However, they were not gods and were definitely not perfect. They had flaws and fears, which gave them the power to do the only thing they knew how to do. Fall under their own weight. The people were so terrified of the world ending and them losing everything they had built, they accidentally caused their own destruction to occur by trying to prevent it. The end came with a swift and terrible iron hand covering the world. The once full and vibrant cities became nothing but barren wastelands of nothingness.
All that remained were tumbleweed, skulls, and crows picking at the flesh of the dead and dying. The once 36 billion people who called Zarlum their home had been reduced down to just 8 billion, all fighting, struggling, and killing each other for survival. The rest had been reduced to crowfeed. However, shockingly, among the madness and death, there was a surprisingly positive side. An effect of the downfall was the animal and plant life was beginning to rise. Without people to hunt down the animals and cut down trees, they were free to begin multiplying to their heart's content, slowly reclaiming the planet. The once massive buildings that used to pierce the sky and stab the heavens had been reduced to dust and rubble for the trees and plants to absorb. One day in the distant future, there would be no evidence that people had been on the planet at all. It's fascinating. The Zerm race has had thousands of years of evolution, and in that time, they had populated the entire planet, covering its surface with buildings, roads, and huge cities. However, despite all of those years, it could all be taken away in just a few, like they were never there. How did this devastation come about? The people, of course. The people had been playing around with things far above themselves, far above the knowledge of any being. The fall was horribly inevitable, not driven by motivation of peace nor nobility, but greed and the need for control. They had done years of research and experiments and learned a lot, but gained no wisdom and were never satisfied in the results. The greed of people caused their own demise, and if the human race aren't careful, they'll find the same horror. It all started in one important city. At the time, the city was one of the 12 mighty island cities surrounding the one and only massive continent, simply known as the mainland. One of the cities was called DelRaven, and had been the most popular city of all the island cities. It had the biggest population and was completely perfect because of the police and the brave heroes of the city keeping the peace. Until, of course, it wasn't. The city was where everything started, with just a single woman breaking out of prison with a lot of very powerful people. She then broke out prisoners and started a brand new prison system, taking control of the government, decimating them, then sending everyone else on a killing spree. While the rest of the world ended itself from panic, she had won, and the world suffered for it. To cause ultimate panic, she unleashed pure and complete hell on the people, in the form of a virus appropriately named Red River. The effects of the virus were different depending on literally nothing at all, which was why the virus was so dangerous. It didn't matter what blood you had, how old you were, where you lived, what you did, and who you were not safe. The effects were completely random. For most, when the virus was breathed in, it would begin destroying the person's white blood cells, then start destroying the muscles and the skin until the person's lungs got filled with fluid and they drowned in their own internal fluids. The only beginning symptom of the virus was the person would begin coughing and would eventually cough up blood, then would begin getting extremely weak. After that, it only took a few hours for the person to die. There had been no way of testing the virus, so of course there couldn't be any kind of cure. Any scientists who tried were probably killed by either the virus or killed by the prisoners escaping the prisons all over the entire planet. The infectious rate was completely unique to every person. It could be in a person's system in a few minutes, or it could take a few years. Only 50% of people were affected by that horrible strain of the virus. Another 20% of people had effects on the brain, causing them to go completely insane, bringing them back in time, turning them into basic cavemen with guns. A lot of them started a religion called the Demon Hand. They believed everyone needed to be infected. It was God's will, and if anyone didn't get it, they would be killed
Another 20% got completely random effects that could be similar to a cold, or could be a hell of a lot worse and random. The last 10% were lucky because they were semi-immune, which meant they could still get incredibly sick, but they would be able to recover if properly medicated. The virus was extremely dangerous and managed to infect the entire world in just 6 months, which caused all cities to become completely empty and horrible places. If people were living there, they wouldn't last long. The virus was a lot worse in the city. Even the insane people could still die from going to the Badlands. The world was bitter and unkind. Survival wasn't easy, and no one could be trusted, because even if someone wasn't insane, they could be infected. The rich and poor alike died by the billions. The world was a much different place. When the virus was released, it was known as the Fall. Before the fall of society, people could go anywhere they wanted and do what they wanted. It was a world built up with the rule of law holding everything together. And if the police weren't able to fight criminals, they had something much stronger than the police could ever have been. And that was what gave people hope and kept them safe. However, after the fall, the world had been divided up into zones, which told people where to go and where to run away from, which was almost everywhere. Countries didn't really exist anymore. It was just the zones, because that's all that mattered. The most common zones were the red zones, which surprisingly were actually the safest zones to be in. They were called the red zones because they were completely empty, apart from the occasional insane people trying to pick at the scraps of society and hunting down normal people trying to do the same. The red zones were actually mostly forests and mountains, which were the best places to live in because there would be fresh running water and areas to get food without having to go to the cities. And the new rule was, cities were to be greatly avoided. It's best for people to keep their eyes open at all times. If there are any food and water, it brings people over. And on the new Zarlum, anything that moves was your enemy, even the wind and the rain, because they could both carry the dreaded virus with them. The orange zones were fairly dangerous. They were the areas the tribes typically lived in. The tribes usually lived in caves or old broken villages and towns. However, they had been known to live in cities, with populations consisting of between 15 and 20. Some of them had grown into their hundreds. They frequently made things more difficult for everyone else because they purposely lived in areas with high amounts of supplies. So if anyone tried to get them, they could be converted to their religion or just killed. The next zones were the most dangerous. The next zone was called the yellow zone, and they were the second most dangerous zone. People knew if the yellow zones were coming over, the only solution was to run as fast and far as possible, because that's the only way to survive. The reason they were so dangerous was because they were the only zones to actually move with the winds, because they were large clouds of yellow fog full of concentrated and condensed red river. And the fact they constantly moved made them hard to predict. Sometimes the winds would push the enormous yellow clouds of gas to the ocean and infect the waters. And sometimes it can hit clouds and rain down virus rain on people below. They were extremely dangerous and toxic because if a person were to stand in the clouds, immune or not, they would die in under a minute without a gas mask. And it had to be a gas mask with oxygen tanks, or otherwise it would be as effective as trying to jump into a volcano with ice around your feet. The yellow zones made survival incredibly hard because people couldn't stay in the cities for more than a few days. That was where the clouds were. Sleeping was dangerous because it could suddenly descend upon you, and if you're not far enough away from them, it was already too late, and your fate had been completely sealed. The number one most dangerous zones were called the dark zones, which were full of horrible creatures. They were large and gray, with long arms attached to incredibly sharp claws. They had thick, leathery skin, hard to penetrate even with the toughest of weapons. They were also incredibly fast and able to sneak around easily despite their large size. because they could perfectly blend into their environment. They used to be normal people, however, the virus had a strange effect in them, causing them to become the creatures. They had evolved in a strange way, no longer using their God-given eyes, but deciding instead to use their ears, which had evolved to allow them to see in echolocation, making it near impossible to avoid them.
They were also shockingly adaptable, being able to adapt to any and every environment in just a few days, even if they traveled through multiple in just a few weeks. It was like the virus took the best of the Zerm race and dramatically accelerated it, while also throwing in the best traits of other creatures to create monsters. They mostly lived in the cities along with the yellow zones because they could survive inside them, so used them to travel around. People knew that to survive, you needed to stay as far away from the cities as possible. However, the problem with that was most, if not all, the supplies needed for survival were in the cities, which was why survival was so difficult. There were some other zones, such as the brown zones. However, no one really went to them because they were horrible places to be, simply because they were body-dumping grounds. No one knew who was putting the bodies there, but whoever had been doing it had stopped because bodies were now everywhere, so it was pointless. People used to go to the brown zones and pick through the bodies for any supplies they may have. However, that quickly stopped when it was found out the virus doesn't leave the system when the person was dead. So the brown zones were huge virus spots as gas escaped the body.
There used to be blue zones, which were underground vaults all the rich people tried to live in when the virus broke out. However, they were all gone. But it wasn't the prisoners or creatures which took them down, not even the virus that destroyed them. They were torn down by the people who built them, who wanted to get inside. There also used to be green zones, which were the safest zones run by the most powerful people on the planet. However, all the people who had sworn to protect the green zones had perished, or just couldn't keep up with the madness.
When the queen died, everything fell apart like a giant Jenga tower, so it was difficult to keep the green zones operational. It was also difficult because creatures and insane people would hunt them down and destroy them, so they were all wiped out. Some people believed there was still one safe zone out there somewhere. However, it was hidden so well, the people who ran it would need to find you, not you find them. But it could have just been people grasping at all the hope they could find, that maybe there was a safe place away from the hell they had been living in. Every single area was plagued by the virus, and every area was full of nature taking over like it was the virus. Survival was for the toughest and fittest in the land.
Outside the city of Dirham was a large redwood forest, which used to be small. However, it had become massive and was only growing bigger. The virus seemed to dramatically increase the growth rate of all plants everywhere. So the trees of the forest were trying to do a who could touch the sky the highest challenge. The trees were beginning to run out of room, so were beginning to run across the only bridge into the city. Maybe one day, the once large city would be nothing but beautiful timber, and nothing was going to stop them. It was inevitable.
It was midwinter, so the forest floor was covered with a fresh layer of cold snow. In the forest were a family of beautiful, fluffy white rabbits living in a roughly made burrow, going deep under the ground. The mother of the rabbits was attempting to control her many children who kept trying to leave to the outside world. However, she knew it wasn't safe out there. They had to stay together to stay alive. The father of the rabbits bravely pointed his head into the sunlight, seeing how bright it was on the white snow as more poured down from the sky. He pushed the rest of his body out the burrow, feeling the blanket of snow under his white paws. It began sniffing the ground with its pink nose, watching the snow as it danced down upon it. The rabbit jumped forward, shaking its head, trying to remove the layer of snow forming on its head. The rabbit began to walk around the forest, slowly trying to find the smallest bit of grass or any kind of vegetation to feed its family. However, its search for food sadly put its guard down, which in this new world was a large mistake. He saw in the distance the smallest piece of grass poking out the ground, so rushed over to it, excited. Before he could get to his prize, a straight wooden arrow with a sharp stoned end swiftly pierced through its throat from the side, pinning it to a tree. Its once white fur beginning to be covered in its crimson blood.
The rabbit began struggling against the tree helplessly, frantically moving its legs, being unable to breathe, coughing up blood, making pained, whimpering sounds as it covered the white snow in a warm layer of fresh blood. The rabbit then came to a stop, as its eyes moved no more, and the life completely drained from it, as it knew its family was probably going to die without him. A few moments after it stopped, a pair of feet wearing thick winter boots stomped over to the rabbit, hearing the sounds of the snow under her feet, along with the cracking of sticks and old leaves. She bent down, putting her bow behind her, putting the string around her shoulder. She got lower, pulling a knife from her back pocket, getting close to the rabbit, checking if the rabbit was still alive. When she determined that the rabbit had passed into the beyond, she slipped the knife back into her pocket, neatly, making sure it wasn't going to cut into her. She reached into her bag on the side of her, pulling out a bag of items she would need for the successful kill. The woman used one hand to lightly press the rabbit against the tree, holding it in place. She then used the other hand to slowly pull the arrow from its neck, making it twitch slightly, putting it neatly next to her. The woman gently guided the rabbit to the ground. The woman stood up, observing her surroundings. A killing in a forest usually bought her all kinds of trouble. The woman was wearing full black clothes to protect herself from the bitter cold. A shirt, a thick jumper, a long black coat, thick trousers covered in pockets, thick gloves, a hat, goggles, a scarf pulled up over her mouth so her face was fully covered and she didn't get cold. She also had the added benefit of having a little protection from the virus. However, what always made her worried was she was wearing black clothes in the white winter, so she stuck out a lot. She had to always be cautious and look everywhere around her when she was outside, to make sure she wasn't attacked, and no one followed her to her house. She was also wearing 4 brown satchels over her shoulders, 2 either side of her body, to hold as many supplies as possible. This woman, despite the fact survival was on the front of her mind at all times, she had a large case of OCD. Everything always had to be perfect, which actually made survival even easier. Because if things weren't perfect, she couldn't function. And perfection was survival in her mind. When she was certain no one was in the forest watching her, she bent down, untying the bag she removed from her satchel, removing a plastic bag, putting the rabbit inside. She sealed it shut to stop the smell, then wrapped it in a thin layer of tinfoil to hopefully make it last a little longer and prevent its blood going all over her bag, which would attract wolves, and that was the last thing she would ever want. She removed a cloth from the small bag, cleaning the arrow and checking the tip of the arrow's condition. When she had seen it wasn't damaged and could be used again, she put it back into the quiver on her back, full of at least 50 arrows, all perfectly crafted to go through the air smoothly. She then stood up, adjusting her bags and removing her bow from her shoulder, also removing one of her arrows. The woman looked around her. The woman's eyes seemed to have evolved over the years to look far into the distance and detect even the slightest amount of movement. Her head snapped around as she swiftly loaded her bow, raising it. However, it was only a leaf falling from a distant tree. When she was sure nothing was around her, she began slowly moving, trying not to cause sound in the snow, because if anyone heard her, it wouldn't be difficult to see her because of the black clothes. She stood out like a singular leaf on a tree. The woman was 29 years old. Her height was 6'2", and her name was Amoura. As she walked, she constantly looked around for people, holding her bow low with an arrow prepared to fire. She knew she had a gun tucked into her back pocket. However, firing a gun was extremely dangerous because it would bring a lot of bad things over to her just from the sound.
Amoura was heading towards her home and didn't want to bring bad things along with her because the people at her cabin wouldn't be too happy with that, which was understandable. Every sound made Amoura terrified, and she was constantly always on edge, feeling like things were going to happen. Silence weirdly scared her more than loud noises, because if she heard sounds, at least she knew something was coming. But in complete silence, something could suddenly jump out at her, and she wouldn't be prepared enough. So she had to be on edge all the time. As she walked, she suddenly heard what sounded like a snapping sound from behind her. She raised her bow arrow, prepared, however. It was just a bird pecking at the ground trying to get a bug, and she knew her odds of hitting it were very slim and didn't want to waste energy on trying. So moved on, leaving the bird to its survival. After an hour of walking, Amoura finally came across her large wooden cabin. She had built the cabin by herself and lived in it alone for years, before the others moved in and finally broke her years-long solitude. Her cabin wasn't much, however, it was one of the best ones out there. The cabin was surrounded by a large wooden wall, which was riddled with razor-sharp wooden spikes, some of which were covered in bloodstains. The spikes were, of course, for protection, and without them they would have perished like so many before many years before this day. Amoura was about to go to the door when she saw something worrying. She approached 3 sharp spikes, which hadn't had blood on before. However, now they were a crimson red. Amoura used her mouth to pull off one of her gloves, placing a finger on the spike, feeling it was still wet. She looked at the ground, seeing a trail of blood to the tree line. She followed it with her eyes. However, the snow was heavily falling, so she couldn't see very far. Amoura tried to scan the tree line for anything, but she couldn't see anything. Something had tried to get into the base while she was away, and by the looks of it, something big and strong, considering it was able to pull itself back out the spikes. Amoura looked at the trail of blood and considered following it. However, if the thing had already hit the spikes, it most probably suffered enough. The only weak spot was a large wooden gate like Jurassic Park. Amoura removed her winter gloves and knocked 15 times in a rhythm. When her knocking was finished, there was a number of clicking. Then the gate swung open, pushing the fresh layer of snow out the way. Amoura had to move back because the doors were being pushed towards her. When the gate came to a stop with a loud clang, the lines of snow on top fell to the ground. Amoura checked her surroundings just in case someone had snuck up on her, then stepped into the sanctuary. When she stepped inside the base, the doors began to close by themselves with a clever barrel tied to the gates, full of water. It began lifting upwards from a rope, closing the doors with a loud clang. Amoura gathered up some wood from against the wall and then placed them on large hooks, which effectively locked the door. She then pushed over 5 large barrels, placing them in the way, so if the wood didn't work, the barrels would. The last step was to attach a piece of string to the door attached to a bell next to the cabin. If the door was opened, it would ring. Amoura was now in safety. To the right of the gate was a massive watchtower, which was a little below the wall, so the people from the outside couldn't see it. In the wall were a few holes which the people could look through and not be seen or shot through. The watchtower had steps up to it, and even a roof for added protection. The cabin was right in the center of the area, and was insanely advanced for the end of days, equipped with things people couldn't even dream of, such as electricity and technology. It had a deck holding up the ceiling with 4 pillars. The inside had heating and a water purifier, the generators of which were outside. The cabin had 4 windows, so in the summer they could let the cold in. However, all of them had wooden shutters over them because of the winter cold. There was a large area with a tarp over it on the side of the house for a very important purpose, however. We'll get to that later. Amoura went up the stairs, opening the wooden door, quickly closing it behind her. She turned to see her family, or the closest thing to a family someone could get with the ways things were. One of her family members was wearing a green tank top and leather trousers. She had long, blood-red hair tied behind her. She was sitting at a desk before a radio trying to communicate with the outside world. Her name was Raven, and she was 31 years old and was speaking into the microphone.
Hello, can you hear us? Do you receive me? Hello?
However, all she was getting was static. The other woman was laying on a bed throwing a ball at the wall, then catching it again, seeming to be almost bored. She had a strange appearance. She had white and black hair like Cruella, and was wearing a black and white suit with the colors on the opposite sides of her hair, with a blue tie. The strangest thing about her was she was an anomaly. She could never die. She was thousands of years old. The woman didn't even know how old she was, because she couldn't remember. She believed the reason why was because the mind could only hold about 100 years of memories. So the further she goes forward, the more she forgets. Her name was Magpie, because she couldn't remember her real name and may as well went as Magpie because of the hair and the suit. And there was another very important reason, but we'll get to that later. Magpie was always living in what she believed was pure hell. She didn't need to eat or drink. Well, she did, but she decided not to, because it wasn't like she was going to die and her hunger pains disappeared hundreds of years before that. The thing she hated the most was the fact that she couldn't sleep, even if she wanted to. Her mind seemed to be overactive. If she died, she would come back to life, so when she tried to sleep, her body assumed she was dying and would wake her up again. For the first few hundred years of the curse, she felt tired all the time. However, her body seemed to have adapted to not needing sleep, so now she was constantly awake. She wouldn't mind being alive forever if she was able to sleep, but she had to constantly be conscious throughout all of it. Magpie's entire life was hell. In the corner was a strange-looking metal table with a blue top looking almost like blueprints with lines running across it. This was the most advanced thing not just in the cabin, but in the entire world even before the fall. This was the Handles table. Handles was the most advanced AI ever created, and they were just glad she was on their side. She wasn't able to do as much as back in the day. However, she was still an incredible asset. They didn't build Handles. Someone very special did. However, like so many others, she's gone. Amoura closed the door, not wanting to let too much cold in. She locked the door behind her quickly, placing the key on a hook. Amoura pulled her scarf down and removed her hat, itching her head, hating the feeling of wearing a hat. Amoura then sat down on a chair next to the door, removing her thick boots, moving her toes around because they were freezing. She then put the boots neatly next to the door next to everyone else's. She stood up, going over to the main dinner table where she removed her bags, placing them neatly on the chairs, feeling her shoulders thanking her. Amoura removed the scarf from her neck, folding it neatly, then placed the scarf and her hat in a wooden basket. Untied her hair, shaking her head to allow her long black hair to fall down either side of her. She removed her coat and other clothes until she was down to just her white tank top and black jeans. Amoura put everything in the basket, then took them over to a washing machine, not yet turning it on. Amoura went into the bathroom and took off the rest of her clothes, putting them in a basket next to the door, which she closed and started the shower. She then started showering, making sure she cleaned all of herself, so she could get the red river off herself if she accidentally got some on herself. Amoura was very unique, because she was completely and totally immune to all the effects of the Red River that was her unique effect. However, Raven wasn't immune, so she had to get the virus off of her. Magpie didn't really care. Either way, she had got the virus a few times, and obviously she always survived. But if she got it, she would keep accidentally giving it to Raven, who would get sick. When she got out the shower, she grabbed something very special to her. She grabbed a short red dress, putting it on, The dress had long sleeves, a boxed neck. She then put on a pair of black tights, walking out the bathroom. It was hot in the house because of the fire in the corner. They didn't want to use the heating because it took a lot of power, and power was hard to come across at the end of the world. Amoura went to the washing machine, putting the rest of her clothes inside the machine, turning it on. Magpie looked at her.
You're wearing that dress again?
Amoura nodded, standing back up.
Yes, I am wearing the dress again. It was my mother's dress, and it fits me perfectly, so I'm going to wear it.
Well, it was tightly fitting on your mother, and it's tightly fitting on you as well.
Shut up.
Magpie smiled, throwing the ball again. Amoura went into the main area. She went over to a cupboard, grabbing a large black cooking pot with a thick metal handle because it was heavy. She then went over to the roaring fire, crackling, eating away all their logs. Amoura filled it with water and placed it on a grill over the fire with a satisfying clink, setting the handle down gently. She grabbed a cloth, putting it over the handle, so when she picked it up, she didn't burn herself. Amoura walked over to her bags, removing 4 large plastic jugs of water, setting them down on the table, hearing the water slosh around. Raven turned her chair around, facing her, removing the headset she was wearing, rubbing her eyes in frustration.
Oh, evening. I didn't hear you come in.
That's fine. You were busy.
Magpie bounced the ball again.
I noticed. I just didn't care.
Raven sighed, choosing as usual to ignore Magpie.
So, what did you get?
I managed to get some water. I had to break the ice and try not to make it freeze in the jugs. It was a real nightmare.
She went over to the water purifier, filling it with water, so they could drink and cook with clean, uninfected water, watching it drip slowly through the machine. As she did this, she spoke to Raven.
I also managed to get some berries and a nice rabbit, so we will be cooking good tonight.
Magpie looked at her, leaning forward.
A rabbit? No wolves followed you or anything worse?
Amoura shook her head, setting the jugs down and going back over to the bags. She started to wash the berries and the rabbit, because the virus was constantly evolving and randomly changing, so it might just infect dead bodies or even plants.
No, I made sure I wasn't followed here. Like normal. I'm not an idiot.
Magpie nodded, throwing the ball again.
I was thinking more of the smell, but I'm sure you were careful. And I know if you were an idiot, you'd be dead, or one of those mental people.
Raven sat back in her chair, running her hands through her hair from stress.
That's good, you got food. I really can't stand that canned shit we usually eat. Have I ever told you I don't like pineapples?
Every night for the past 2 years. But what choice do we have?
Amoura took the lid off the pot and started throwing in ingredients like vegetables and seasoning. She then took the rabbit from her bag, skinning it, and placing it on the grill, hearing it sizzle and bubble, beginning to cook, creating a delicious smell, making everyone hungry. She turned to Magpie, who was still throwing the ball.
Hey, Magpie?
Magpie looked over.
Yes, what do you want?
You've lived a really insanely long life. So, in theory, you've cooked rabbit before. I haven't, so could you cook this rabbit?
She nodded, sitting up, hearing the bed springs clink under her.
Sure, I've done it before.
Amoura nodded.
You've done everything before, so that's helpful.
When I lived in my cave all those years ago, I cooked rabbits all the time. But they were never for me. They were for my team, who had to eat. Annoying bastards.
Magpie started cooking the rabbit as Amoura walked over to Raven. She leaned over the desk, looking at the radio.
Have you been able to get in contact with them yet?
Raven leaned forward, twisting a black dial and hitting a red button.
No, we're just getting static noise for some reason. There's no signals out there at all.
Amoura looked at the dials.
Well, is it our end or theirs?
I think it's their end. Our tower is 100%, I think. Right, Handles?
A slightly robotic female voice from the Handles desk said.
Yes, the phone tower is running at full. It must be their end. Maybe they haven't arrived at the tower yet. They have to keep moving, hoping to stay alive.
Yeah, because for some reason the creatures like to go to any sites which help with communication and kill all the people inside. They must be pretty smart.
Oh, thank God for that. The creatures killing every person on Zarlum are smart. I was almost getting worried for a minute there. I still haven't seen these creatures,
Magpie said from the corner.
If we do see one, we're dead. Well, apart from me.
Suddenly and finally, the radio crackled and popped into life, and they all quickly rushed to it. End of episode 1, part 1.